All right. Hi. Welcome and thank you for joining us again at Crossroads. Just like every month, we are here thinking about what intelligence is, what parts of science can help us answer our questions about what its mechanisms and mathematics are. So Cross Labs is a research institute and a new kind of university in Kyoto and Tokyo. And what we do is we distill knowledge from the disciplines of the mind, brain science, information sciences, artificial intelligence, and artificial life, and link it up to ideas that could bring new technology and new changes in society. So the cross and crossroads means we go interdisciplinary, and this is our monthly fun public forum on the sciences of mind and intelligence. We are looking at big new ideas with a cross-disciplinary kind of focus. And we are supported by Cross Compass, which is a leading artificial intelligence company in Japan that supports industries such as manufacturing and things like that. Now, before today's talk, I want to give a special thanks to a couple of people, including Olaf, Antoine, Stephen, Oneris, and Katsu. And just like every talk, today's talk is going to have three parts. So first of all, I'll introduce our speaker and we'll have our talk. After that, it'll be followed by an interactive Q&A on Slido, and the link's in the chat for that. And then after the Q&A, there will be an off-stream discussion. So today it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Antoine Cully, who is a lecturer at Imperial College London. And today his talk will be on learning a diverse set of good solutions, concepts, and new perspectives on quality diversity optimization. Antoine?
Thank you very much, Lisa, for the introduction, and good morning or hello, everybody. It's really my pleasure to be here today to talk about the kind of research we do in my lab, which is really around the idea of learning not just a single solution to a problem at hand, but exploring what diversity can provide when it is poured into the mix. And so you will see that I will talk a lot about robotics because that's the core of my research as well. But I'm quite convinced that a lot of the concepts that I will touch on today can also be transposed to other domains, and I will give you a couple of examples along the way. So the first thing here that I will talk about is optimization, because the type of algorithms that I will present are just optimization algorithms, and as I said, they can be applied to a lot of different applications. And optimization algorithms are used in a lot of domains. So, for instance, in machine learning, we use optimization algorithm in order to train, for instance, weights or to find the optimal weights of neural networks. So, for instance, we have an example here of how we can use this kind of algorithm to play video games, for instance. We can also use optimization algorithm to train robots to do specific tasks. So this is, for instance, a very fundamental task of flipping pancakes, really important, but also very, very difficult to do. And so that's why we need some very efficient optimization algorithm. And we can also use optimization algorithm, for instance, to design products. So here, for instance, it's an antenna that was automatically designed through an evolutionary computation algorithm in order to design an antenna that maximizes reception ratio and that was used in a space application. So it's actually embedded on a spacecraft. And there are multiple optimization algorithms or optimization techniques that exist. And among many different sources of inspiration, natural evolution is quite a good source of inspiration, because actually natural evolution solved a very, very, very challenging problem, that is developing organisms that can survive on our planet. And our planet is a very complex, challenging environment that is constantly changing, that is very hardly predictable. And so it's quite amazing to see how natural evolution found a very good solution that is actually ourselves. Natural evolution managed to come up with humans that are very well adapted to our world, that can survive, that can strive, and so on. And so that's why natural evolution, for instance, through the concept of evolutionary computation, is very interesting as an optimization algorithm. But if we look closely, we can see that it found not only one good solution as humans, but it also found a lot of other solutions. So, for instance, right now, if we count the number of species on Earth, we can count between 10 to 14 millions of different species. And all of them are a very good solution to the same problem. They are just simply different. So, for instance, you will have some species that are swimming, some others that are very big, like elephants, some others that are very slow, but also very small, and things like that. And this kind of diversity is surprisingly, most of the time not really considered in traditional optimization tasks. Um, so so here that's a little bit what we will try to explore. And in particular, we will observe why having this kind of large diversity of solution can be good. So typically there are some hypotheses that are saying that the diversity of creature and species that we can see on Earth is what enabled, for instance, life to continue after a catastrophic situation like a mass extinction. It's because not all the creature, not all the different species are affected in the same way by this catastrophic situation, and some of them can continue and survive and still strive and perpetuate the generation over generation. Some other type of application, for instance, is when you have to deal with another type of unexpected situation like mechanical damage. So if you have different ways to achieve certain tasks, then you can use this diversity in order to try to find another way to do the task that is not impacted by, for instance, your mechanical damage if you have a broken leg like here. And as I said, we have a lot of different family of applications that can be that can benefit from this kind of diversity of solution. For this talk, I will focus on robotics and how we can make robots more resilient, versatile, and autonomous. But for instance, you can imagine that having ways to autonomously generate large diversity of effective solution will be also very useful, for instance, for computer-assisted drug design. We are talking about this kind of vaccine and drugs a little bit on a daily basis right now. But you can also consider a lot of other type of application, like, for instance, on content that can be automatically generated, for instance, for video games, for movies, for series, where you might want to have all the different experience for the users that will be as good as possible, but also as diverse as possible, so that every time, for instance, a player enter a new level of your favorite video games, the experience will be as good as possible, but also as unique as possible. So now, the main questions that I will try to answer here is how can we generate such a collection of diverse but also high-performing solutions? And with many other people from the evolutionary computation community, and including Lisa here, the community come up with a new type of solution or new family of algorithms that are called quality diversity optimization, where the objective is that within a single optimization process to discover such a collection of diverse and high-performing solutions. And I will show you a couple of examples of results that we obtain in my lab. So for instance, we use those algorithms to try to find different ways for an hexapod like this one in simulation to learn how to walk as fast as possible on a straight line. So this slide contains a little bit of technical details, but it's just for people who might want to know that. But the only thing you need to understand here is actually the robot has 18 motors, 3 per leg, and each motor is controlled with this kind of sine wave that is parameterized by a couple of parameters: the amplitude, the phase, and the duty cycle. And what we want is to have the robot that maximize the travel distance in 5 seconds, so after running the simulation for 5 seconds. And we want to have a diversity of ways the robot is actually touching the ground during the locomotion. So sometimes using more the back legs, sometimes using more the front legs, and this kind of diversity. And so we run our quality diversity algorithm. I will go into the detail a little bit later. And the result is that this algorithm managed to find not just one solution, as I said, but 13,000 different ways to work straightforward as fast as possible. And so here we have kind of a complex picture, but again, here what you just need to understand is that every colored pixel on this big matrix is a different way to work. And the more the pixel is red, the faster goes the robot. And so here you can see that we have a lot of red pixels. So this means that the algorithm found not just one good solution and a lot of degenerated solution, but actually a very large diversity of effective solution, each of them being a little bit different. And so inside this collection, we have naturally some behaviors that are using all the leg more or less evenly. So that's something we can call an hexapod gate. But we have other gates that are using a little bit less some legs. So for instance, the legs that are circled in red at the beginning of the video are in contact with the ground less than 10% of the time. And so here you can see the robot is looking more like a quadruped with 2 additional arms in front that can be used, for instance, for grasping something or anything like that. And among this large collection of 13,000 different ways to walk, we have some more creative solutions sometimes as well. So here, according to the algorithm, the robot found a way to walk straight forward without actually touching the ground more than 10% of the time with each legs. And that was a surprising result for me at the beginning, but this is actually what the algorithm found. The algorithm found a way to flip on his back and continue walking on his knee, because that's something completely different that was not actually touching the ground with the feet of the robot. And there are multiple examples of this kind of creativity. So for instance, here is an example of a task where we want the robot to learn how to push this cube to any different position on the table. So in this video, there is just a single example. We managed to generate a lot of collection, but because it was a pushing task, we designed the robot so that it won't be able to open and close the gripper, because that was not part of the design process that we intended. And so we were okay with the fact that the robot will just never be able to grasp the cube and lift it in the air, because that was not, again, the objective of the task. But we were very surprised when we ran our quality diversity algorithm and we realized that actually the robot still managed to find a way to do that, to grasp the cube, simply by blocking the robot in a given position and smashing it, for instance, from the top or from the side, like what you can see right now. And to finish, among all the different ways or all the different examples of creativity, of quality diversity, in case your robot becomes tired of walking, he can just discover how to roll on his own. That's just another way to move. Okay, good. So this is a couple of examples of the creativity and diversity that we can obtain with quality diversity, but how is it working actually? So as I said, quality diversity is about generating solution of first high quality. So for that, we will use the definition of a reward or a fitness function, something very, very standard in any optimization algorithm. So it can be also called a cost function. So that's just functions that assigned a value to every solution we want to evaluate. But the other thing that is important in quality diversity is this diversity aspect. And for that, we use the concept of behavioral descriptor. A behavioral descriptor is something that characterizes a solution, so certain aspect of the solution. So typically, if you remember the example of the example robot walking by touching the ground differently, the behavioral descriptor in this case is the proportion of times that each leg is in contact with the ground. And this description is what defines the types of solution that we are looking for. It's usually nothing else than just a numerical vector, like a label for each of the solution. And it's very, very likely that multiple solutions will have the same behavioral descriptor, but they might have different performance or different fitness values or reward values. So this concept of behavioral descriptors come from a very fundamental paper that is a novelty search paper, and probably this entire presentation could not have been possible without this paper here. And so here's the idea is that thanks to these behavioral descriptors, for instance, if we have a collection of solutions of different creatures like this one, we can, for instance, define the behavioral descriptor as, I don't know, the number of legs, as the presence of a shell, or the number of arms, or something like this, which means that when we have a new solution, like this tortoise here, we can use the behavioral descriptor to, for instance, compute a distance between the other solution from the collection, and compute what we call, for instance, a novelty score. And if the novelty of the solution is large enough, so for instance, if we are far away from all the creatures with a shell and with 4 legs and without arms, then maybe we will be novel enough so that we can add this solution into the collection. So from a more abstract level, the most of quality diversity algorithm will follow similar step as the one displayed in this screen. So we start, or everything is centered around this collection of high-performing and diverse solutions. And usually what we will do is that we will select, for instance, one solution randomly. Typically, we will perform some mutation. We will evaluate the result of this new solution. And during the evaluation, we will record the reward or the fitness function, and we will also record the behavioral descriptors that I just explained before. And then when we have those two new information, so the behavioral descriptor and the fitness, we will try to add this solution back into the collection, or to add it to the collection, because it's actually a new solution. And so here it's relatively simple. If the if the solution is a new solution, so if the novelty is sufficiently large enough, we just add it to the collection. And that's a good news. We just increase the size of our collection. On the other hand, if the solution is not novel enough, this means that something similar already exists, then we will just compare the fitness or the reward, and we will keep the solution with the highest fitness. And so here again, if the new solution is better, so if it has better fitness, we will add it to the archive, and that's a good news, because this means that we also increase the overall quality of the solution. So this was kind of a general and abstract level, but if I want to go more into the detail, a very famous and widely used algorithm is MapEdit. So MapEdit actually use a collection that has a form of the shape of a grid. So what this means is that the behavioral descriptor, as I said, is just a numerical vector. So it's a vector space. And we can just discretize this space into a grid. So for instance, if you have a 2D vector, you can just create a 2D grid like this one by saying that every dimension will be discretized, for instance, with 5 chunks, like what we have here in this screen. And then the MapEdit, the other characteristic is that it's using a uniformly random selection of the solution at the beginning of the loop that I showed you before. It's a very easy to implement algorithm, but it's also a surprisingly extremely effective algorithm. And so the way it's working is that we start with this collection that is initially empty, so just an empty grid or an empty table, and we randomly generate some solution. We generate the solution, we evaluate them, and we store them directly into the corresponding cells based on the behavioral descriptor. So I have a given behavioral descriptor that will give me the location of a cell, for instance, and I store a solution here. And then the loop of MapEdit starts by simply randomly selecting one of the solutions that is in the grid, performing a mutation. So here we will have a different solution. We will evaluate this new solution, and we try to add it back to the grid. So if the new solution lands because of the behavioral descriptor into an empty cell, we just add this new solution into the cell. And if the next one is actually landing in a cell where there is already a solution, we will just keep the best one. And we repeat this very simple loop multiple times, like millions of times. And at the end, we will have a collection of high-performing and diverse solutions. And so, for instance, an example of result is here on the example robot. So that's the physical implementation of the robot you have seen in simulation before, where we can use this kind of algorithm to teach it how to work in every direction. So not only straightforward, but also to learn how to work forward, backward, turning left, turning right, and so on. You can also easily imagine that if you have this kind of, so here it's a kind of collections that we have where every single point corresponds to a different solution, and the size, the line here just corresponds to the final orientation of the robot. And you can easily imagine that if you have this kind of collection of different ways to control your robots, you can use this with, for instance, a planning algorithm to enable your robot to navigate through, for instance, to avoid obstacles, to leave rooms, and so on. So that was for the kind of the fundamental of quality diversity. But now that we have this collection of diverse and high-performing solutions, what can we do with that? So the first thing we can do is that we can use it as a new search space. And so, for instance, this is what we have done in the paper that we published a couple of years ago in Nature, where we try to use a collection of solutions in order to adapt to unforeseen situations. So again, this is just the physical implementation of our example robots. It's a relatively simple robot with 18 degrees of freedom, and a small embedded computer, and a single sensor, which is this 3D camera in the middle here, that has a single purpose, which is to inform the robot of its trajectory or velocity. And the velocity of the robot will be used as a reward or fitness function. And so initially, when the robot is intact, we can control it with something that is quite standard, that is called a tripod gate. And you can see that the robot goes on a straight line at a good speed of 25 centimeters per second. But then later what happened is that a damage occurs. And so here what we have done is that we simply disconnected a cable at the base of the leg. And because all the motors are connected in series, actually just removing this single cable is actually disconnecting the entire leg. And what we can see is that this very small damage that can actually happen, and actually that happens way more frequently than you can imagine, even on spacecraft. You can see that it has a very strong impact because now the performance of a robot falls to 3 centimeters per second. So here, what we did is that we used a collection of the 13,000 different solutions of working straightforward that I showed you before. And we were now looking not to change the solution, but to find among the solution, which solution still worked despite of the damage. And so here we use another algorithm that is called Bayesian optimization. I will not go into the detail, in order to quickly sample and explore which solution to do and to update our prediction and continue to explore. And so here you can see that the robot has explored and tried different things until finding this solution that seems to work pretty well. And then the robot continues because he has no way to know right now if nothing else better might exist maybe. So it continues, and at some point right now, for instance, it has explored sufficiently, and we have some automatic stopping criterions that enable or that tells the robot to stop exploring and focus on the best solution found so far. And so this is what the robot found in only 40 seconds. So all of this is real time. The only thing that is happening between the cuts of the video is literally me taking the robot and placing back at the beginning of the room. And what we can also see is that the obtained behavior, in addition to having a very decent performance, it's also a very dynamical behavior. So here you can see the slow motion where the robot is really pushing on the back legs and moving forward to avoid using the middle legs. This kind of dynamical movement is usually quite difficult to have with a more traditional optimization approach on physical systems. Another type of application we can use with quality diversity and with this diversity of solution is that we can, instead of using this as a search space, we can also use it directly as an action space. And we can even plug another quality diversity algorithm on top of this action space. So that's what we have done with hierarchical behavioral repertoire. So where we use one of the collection from a quality diversity algorithm, and we use another quality diversity algorithm to explore it, and then another one, and we chain this as many times as we like. And so we use it on this redundant robotic arm. So it's 8 degrees of freedom robotic arm, a planar robotic arm. And the first thing we did is that we use quality diversity in order to learn how to reach any point in the vicinity of the robot while having all the joints contributing more or less equally to the motion. So that's why we have this very smooth behavior of the robot. And so now that we have a robot that knows how to reach any point in the vicinity, we can use this set of controller, this set of behaviors as an action space. So for instance, to learn something more advanced. So now that we know how to link or to draw points, we can try to see how we can connect the points in order to learn how to draw lines of different direction and different length. Now that we know how to draw lines, we can learn how to connect the line together in order to draw arcs and circles. And we can continue like this as much as we want. But here, what we have done so far was actually to end design the behavioral descriptor for each layer. So for the first layer, we said, oh, the final position of the robot is what is interesting. For the second, we said, what is interesting is the direction of the line and the length, and so on. And what we tried also is say, oh, what if we use an external data set in order to define automatically for us the behavioral descriptor? So here what we have done is that we use the MNIST dataset, which is a very famous dataset of handwritten digits that you have some example here. And we train what we call an autoencoder, that is a dimensionality reduction algorithm that can condense the information or the data into small, what we call latent space that captures the information contained in the data set into, for instance, this 2D space. And so then we can use this 2D representation as a behavioral descriptor. And what we have at the end is that we have a robot that discovered how to draw digits so between 0 and 9. So here are a couple of examples. You have seen a 0, then a 1, so this is a 2, the next one will be a 3, and so on. We have another good thing with this hierarchy is that actually the only part that is really specific to the robot is the first layer that we have trained. The thing is that if we train another first layer but using a different robot like this now robot, a small humanoid robot, then we can directly transpose everything we have learned on the upper layer to these new robots and directly transfer the knowledge. So here, what you can see at the bottom of the slide is a couple of examples of the narrow robot drawing digits literally like the robotic arm, even if the narrow robot actually never tried or even been trained to draw these kind of digits. Another example of application of this diversity is that we can use this diversity of good solution as a data set. And so, for instance, we can use this in order to enable the quality algorithm, the quality diversity algorithm, to discover on its own what can be feasible and what would be the most appropriate behavioral descriptor. And so, following these trends, we developed the algorithm that is called Aurora for autonomous robots that realize their abilities. The idea is that we can follow the same iterations as a quality diversity algorithm, like the maplet algorithm that I explained before, with some random initialization, some first evaluation on a robot. From the evaluation, we can capture some sensory data, that here you can see some samples, and we can use a dimensionality reduction, like again, an autoencoder that's like what I've shown you before, that can be initially just randomly initialized, and that will store some solutions. So maybe you don't see it, but there are actually 5 small points here. And then we can use those small or few examples here in order to construct a data set from the solution that are contained into our collection or in our repertoire. And from this data set, we can train our dimensionality reduction algorithm. And then we can continue, because now that we have an improved dimensionality reduction algorithm, so a better representation of what can be the ideal behavioral descriptor, we can use this representation in order to continue the loop of quality diversity to explore more and more the space of possible solution, so to collect more data. And the good thing is that if we collect more data or more solution in our collection, this means that we also collect more samples for our data set, which means that we can refine even further or dimensionality reduction algorithm, which will lead to an even better representation. And we can iterate like this multiple times between the quality diversity loop and the dimensionality reduction algorithm, training multiple times until converging. And so, for instance, on the papers that we are finalizing right now, we have shown that we can use this on different tasks. So, for instance, on the robotic maze, where we have this kind of robot that tries to navigate through a maze, we also train it on the same example robots. We have also air hockey task where we try to generate diversity of puck trajectories. And what we have observed is that Aurora, without any information about the task, about the capabilities of the robot, discovers the same coverage of diversity of solution that what we will obtain with a quality diversity algorithm using the exact or using something that has been handcrafted and engineered by someone with some expertise. Here, what we can see is that Aurora can find the same diversity without this additional prior knowledge. And finally, as a last example of application of quality diversity benefits, is that we can also use this diversity of solution as a set of stepping stones to improve quality diversity algorithm itself, but also to improve deep reinforcement learning algorithms. So, for instance, here's the good thing is that the quality diversity collection will contain a lot of high-performing and diverse solution, which means that it's a lot of successful example. And so that might be very good in order to train better critics. So a critic in reinforcement learning is usually what is used to inform the deep reinforcement learning algorithm what are the optimal action to do, and then to train better the different solutions. But this means that if we have more diverse and successful solution, we can have an improved critic, which means that we can have a better gradient estimate, so a better way of knowing how to change and adjust the solution we have in order to find something even better. And so this leads to a better or more effective search, which then in turns lead to better solutions that are eventually added into the quality diversity collection. And so here you can see that we have a virtuous cycle where we can have the collections that get improved, leading to better solutions, and eventually leading to a better collection itself. So here we have a proposed policy gradient assisted map-edit algorithm that will be presented this summer at Gecko, where we combined one of the state-of-the-art deep reinforcement learning algorithm, TD3, with map-edits. And the idea is that we combine the genetic algorithm variation operator that leads to an undirected search that is quite important to make sure that we continue to explore without any prior or any bias. And on the other end, we have a policy gradient variation operator where we have a directed exploration that uses the information from the critic in order to ensure that we follow the gradient and improve as much as we can the performance of the solution. We have tested this solution on 4 different scenarios from the OpenAI gym environments that we call, or that we slightly change into the QD gym environments. So where we use the exact same reward definitions. That means trying to walk as fast as possible while minimizing energy. But we also included the definition of a behavioral descriptor, which is just the proportion of time that each legs of those creature are spending in contact with the ground. So very similar to what we did before with the example robots. And here, the policy, what is interesting is that what we are training in order to control the robots, they are actually feed-forward neural networks with a total of more than 20,000 different parameters. So that's a very large search space that is usually quite difficult to tackle with evolutionary algorithm, or at least with map-edits by default. And here are a couple of the results that we have. So here you can see the algorithms that we propose compared to map-edits and to the same algorithm, but with only the policy gradient approach. And here is the TD3 algorithm, so the state-of-the-art deep reinforcement learning algorithm, where we just store every solution that are found naturally through the course of the TD3 optimization into the similar type of archive. And here, the most important thing is the more yellow spot we have, the better, right? And so here what we can see is that in the worker task and in the half cheetah task, we can see that map-edits has a hard time to find this kind of good solution because of the complexity of the solution we have, while the proposed algorithm finds a lot of very good solution. We can also see that it's not only the policy gradient approach that is helping, it's also the genetic algorithm variation, because here we can see we have a better coverage and overall better solutions that are found. So sometimes not following the gradients, exploring just randomly, leads to some good stepping stones that can lead in turn into even better solution. And you can see on the GIF here the progression of the coverage, and you can see how PGA map-edit is very, very fast. And here, that's literally the single slide with some graph. What is interesting here is that on the first line, the green curve here represents how good overall the collection is of the PGA algorithm, and you can see that it's above all the other competitive algorithm. And we can also see, more interestingly, is on the max fitness. So usually we tend to expect that deep reinforcement learning algorithm, especially state-of-the-art deep reinforcement learning algorithm, will be very good at finding one excellent solution. But what we can see is that in some of the experiments we have done, actually in 3 out of the 4, we have the PGA map-edit algorithm that finds better solution than the state-of-the-art deep reinforcement learning algorithm. So here, just to finish this talk, a couple of videos. So here are some example of with the walker. So you can see that we have a robot that walks, and here the robot is using the 2 legs evenly. And so now in the second example, you can see that it's kind of dragging its feet a little bit more, so spending more time in contact with the ground. So right now, it's trying to use one of the legs more frequently than the other one, and so on. And this kind of illustration can be seen across the board with all the different environments that we have. So I will let slightly the video run a little bit longer. And so that's the conclusion of my talk. So here today I try to show you how quality diversity algorithm can be used to generate a diversity of high-performing solutions, and that we can use this collection of high-performing solutions in order to, first of all, leverage the creativity of evolutionary algorithm and find surprising solution. We can also use this creativity and diversity in order to adapt to unforeseen situation, to also build hierarchical structure to generate more and more complex behavior and first more and more complex solution. We can even use this in order to as a data set in order to find automatically what are the optimal representation for quality diversity algorithm. And we can finally also use this diversity in order to leverage the synergies between quality diversity and deep reinforcement learning algorithm. And so now if there's any question, I would be more than pleased to answer those.
Great, thank you so much for the talk. So if anybody in the audience does have any questions, the link to Slido is in the YouTube chat, so you can go ahead and check that out and submit your questions, and then we'll be happy to have Antoine answer them. So I'd like to actually start with a question of my own,
Sure.
which is at the beginning of the talk you mentioned, so a lot of this talk focused on robotics applications. I was wondering what other sorts of domains would be good domains for quality diversity besides besides robotics. Yeah.
So the first one that comes to my mind is this automatic content generation for typically video games. There are a couple of groups around the world, and especially the groups of Julian Togelius, who are currently doing massive amount of fantastic work on this domain. And I think that's a very good example because I'm playing a lot of video games, and I really enjoy when you discover a new game for the first time, when you're just exploring a new world and you discover everything. And I think if you can generate this kind of experience every time you enter a new level, that would be fantastic. The issue, of course, is that currently manpower is limited, and so we cannot have like we cannot reach this level of diversity manually, and so we need automated way to do it. And there are more and more video games with automatic content generation, like Minecraft, Violin, for instance, where the world is procedurally generated. But we can also try to do this through quality diversity as well.
Cool, thanks. So let's go ahead and we will take some questions over on Slido. So our first question is, it's claimed that QD algorithms find creative results, but for me, they are just unexpected. Is there any difference between creative and unexpected results?
So it depends. So I don't think there is a huge difference. Indeed, there are definitely just unexpected solution, but the creativity here is the capabilities of finding those unexpected situations. So typically, usually when you do a gradient descent, you might be very limited to the initial starting point of the gradient descent algorithm, and you will converge to the nearest local optimum most of the time. And obviously, there are some methods around in order to mitigate this situation. But here, when I say that we have some creative solution, is that the capabilities to think a little bit outside the box or outside this or local minimum and exploring more and more and finding creative or, as you said, unexpected solutions. And what is interesting is that in our experience with quality diversity, it's not just a fluke. It's not just like we run the algorithm once and we got some surprising results. It's literally something that happens a lot of times. So for instance, in my lab, we have on our Slack or team channel, we have a specific channel called Random, and it's where we actually post a lot of videos and example of surprising results that we obtain. It's something that we observe very frequently. And these capabilities of thinking outside the box and finding surprising or unanticipated solution is something that sometimes we need, for instance, in order to find a solution to unexpected problems. Literally, with my example robots becoming damaged, if you have, for instance, a problem for some reason, all your legs are damaged, having the capabilities to flip on your back and continue to work on your knees might be a valuable solution that requires some creativity, first of all, to find.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So our next question is, does quality diversity performance vary with the chosen behavioral descriptor? And how do you select the right behavioral descriptor in large non-discrete search spaces?
So this is a very complex scientific question. I have actually a couple of PhD students working on this exact question. So typically I see that there are kind of two trends. So either you have some expert knowledge or some priors about what would be the diversity of solutions that you want. So for instance, when I have my robot that is, for instance, trying to learn how to reach any point in its vicinity. So here, this is part of the task that I want, literally in the same way someone will design or craft specific reward function or specific fitness function, for instance, in order to walk as fast as possible. You can craft your behavioral descriptor so that the robot will exhibit certain type of solution. So for instance, if I say that my behavioral descriptor is the final position of my robot, then the robot will walk in any direction. However, if you don't have this prior knowledge, then trying to find ways to automatically find what would be the optimal solution, and especially in very large, continuous or non-discrete spaces like sensory data, exactly like what we are trying to do with the Aurora space, it's already more challenging. The overall principle is that if we have a powerful enough dimensionality reduction algorithm that can capture all the variety of solution and perceptions that we can observe and generate through quality diversity, then our hope are that in this collection of solutions, we will capture everything that is possible. But the issue, of course, is that we will, in quality diversity, we always have to make a choice about what we need to keep. And so that's why we have a dimensionality reduction. We reduce the dimensionality of the problem by just removing what is not significant. So we're removing sometimes just noise, so that's good. But sometimes we might also remove solutions that are even just more rare on its own. So for instance, one of the issues we might have with solutions like Aurora is that solutions that are just super creative, like flipping over and walking on your knees, might be so sparse and so rare that it would be probably forgotten by the dimensionality reduction algorithm. So finding this balance between something that is completely unsupervised compared to something that is uncrafted, and yet something that enables enough creativity or the representation of unique solution without losing them in the vast majority of things that we discover, is an ongoing scientific challenge.
Okay, cool. Our next question then, can we use quality diversity for general learning to avoid early convergence towards suboptimal solutions in favor of generalization? And are there any new approaches in that direction?
Yes, but actually this is not something very specific to quality diversity. And these kind of approaches have been explored, I think, almost 10 years ago, with, for instance, the use of just diversity as a secondary helping objective compared to when combined with another principal objective. So for instance, you can use multi-objective optimization with the first objective being the reward you want to explore, and the second objective maximizing the diversity, for instance, within your population. So there have been a lot of work around, for instance, the concept of novelty search with local competition, and the multi-objectivization of novelty search that have been published, for instance, from the evolutionary computation community almost 10 years ago. And quality diversity now just bringing this to a new level, but following the same trends and same capabilities.
All right, and our next question is a little bit less technical. What are your favorite sci-fi books?
Whoa, my favorite sci-fi books. Sci-fi, I don't know. I'm more medieval, so I will definitely say The Witchers. I'm fan of the small novels. Sci-fi, yeah, no, I'm more medieval or heroic fantasy man, let's say.
All right. Okay, so back to technical questions. What are the weaknesses of state-of-the-art QD? QD is quality diversity.
So one of the main weaknesses that we have is this the size of the dimensionality of the search space. So that's one of the main issue, and that's why I'm very excited about the last work that I show you, where we can now actually scale to very large policies with 20,000 parameters. And I think that's a really impressive. There are a lot of work. I mean, a couple of other works around also that we're talking about it in the paper that are also following this direction. Another very challenging aspect is the notion of stochasticity. So because, as I said, when you evaluate one solution, you need to record not only the reward, but you need also to record the BR descriptor in order to know where to store the solution in your collection. The issue is that if those two information are noisy, because just the environment is noisy or because the environment is stochastic. So typically, if you start your policy from different initial states, then this means that for instance, the location where you want to store your solution in the archive will change after every evaluation. And so maybe you will not store the solution at the right place or at the legitimate place of this solution, and you will compare it to other solutions that are maybe not the right one to compare with. And you might also replace solution just because you have a reward value that is high, but just because it's a fluke and because it was just very lucky. And you will lose actually legitimate and genuinely good solution because of this noise. So ensuring that we can have something that works well in stochastic environment is an ongoing challenge. There are some brute force approaches like just evaluating every solution 100 times and computing the average. That works, but you can easily imagine that it would just slows down the algorithm by a factor of 100. There are some other techniques. So for instance, we published a paper called Deep Grid a couple of last year that is helping in this situation, but there are a lot of work that remains to be done in this direction as well.
Okay, thank you. So our next question, when a search space is multidimensional, can we have several crossed behavioral descriptors?
So yes, so first of all, the BR descriptor, as I said, is a multidimensional numerical vector. So by design, we already have multiple dimensions here. However, in all the examples that I showed, the dimensions were kind of representing the same thing. And I definitely understand that we can have dimension or even completely independent BR descriptors that will capture different things. And there are some works in the literature, for instance, from Stéphane Doncieux in Paris, where they are actually exploring the use of multiple archives at the same time, each of the archive or each of the collection considering the solution according to different BR descriptors. And we can use this in order to do to explore in different ways. We have done also, but that has not been, or that's an ongoing process, where we have the different repertoire or different collection according to the different type of interaction we can have. So for instance, if you have a robot that can play with a cube and and the same robot but can also play with, let's say, a cylinder, we can have actually a repertoire, each of them considering the interaction of a given object. And it would be interesting to explore how the synergy between those different repertoires can be used and leveraged in the future.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, next question. Does training with quality diversity algorithms and evolutionary algorithms have any robustness gains compared to reinforcement learning?
So I won't say that it's the case by definition or by design. Usually, as I said, especially deep reinforcement learning, they are using a lot of very well-established baseline where, for instance, the initial starting point of the behaviors, for instance, are randomly generated with a starting noise. There are some sticky actions. There are a lot of things that are here in place to ensure that the obtained solution are robust to this kind of variation and stochasticity. It's rarely the case, or it's not that much considered in the quality diversity literature at the moment, from what I know. But what we showed also in the paper, the PGA MAP8 paper, is that combining the diversity of of solution contained in the collection with the critique from deep reinforcement learning is actually something also very good in order to increase the robustness of the solution obtained by the quality diversity algorithm. So I don't know if we can go back, for instance, to the slide here, but for instance, the final line here is that what we have done is that we took the best solution from the archive, and we evaluated the solution 50 times, and we recorded the difference between this reevaluation of the fitness compared to the initial max fitness that we recorded. And what you can see is that as soon as you have a critique, so if you use PGA MapEdit or even TD3 and those algorithms, we have a difference that is close to zero. So definitely significantly helping the diversity. On the other end, the robustness, sorry. On the other hand, if you use MapEdit, the standard MapEdit, so standard quality diversity algorithm, you can see that we have a hard time to maintain this performance. So again, I won't say that there is anything in quality diversity really here to promote robustness of a single solution. Of course, if you consider the entire diversity and solution, like in order to adapt, like what I showed you with the robot adapting to damage, you have a sense of diversity. But for at the single solution level, there is nothing inside quality diversity, but combining it with deep reinforcement learning and critiques and models is definitely something that is very promising at the moment.
Okay, great. For our next question, and I see we have a bit of a contention in some of the questions that are coming up. We'll see about those. Is quality diversity optimization an evolutionary search over solution space and not a pure search space? Is it indeed a secondary search approach over already found solutions?
So indeed, so some people are also seeing this kind of search, not really as searching for a single solution, but searching for kind of also meta objective of finding a lot of different solutions. And sometimes there is a little bit of confusion when I'm presenting quality diversity to people that are coming from a more usual optimization background, for instance, where when they hear me saying, oh, we need solutions that are diverse and high performing, this is just a multi-objective optimization problem. But actually, the concept of multi-objective and quality diversity, they are actually almost orthogonal in a sense that we can even consider a quality diversity context where instead of considering a single fitness, we can have multiple fitness and so have a multi-objective definition. What is interesting here is that actually what quality diversity optimization is doing is indeed doing kind of, as the question asks, making a search over the collection of solutions. And in this case, indeed, that would become a pure multi-objective solution because we want a single collection that is exhibiting a very good average performance and a very good diversity. But the thing is that if you try to use your favorite multi-objective optimization algorithm, like let's say NSGA2, and you try to optimize this diversity, this kind of collection by considering collection as one solution, you will see that it's just intractable. You can easily imagine that even if a single controller that you are evolving as, let's say, 30 parameters, but if you are looking for 13,000 different solutions, you already have, just for one collection, a huge number of parameters to evolve. And if you need to have a Pareto front of diversity of like a variety between high diversity and high average performance of your collection, you can easily imagine that it's very intractable. One of my PhD students actually tried to run NSGA2 in order to evolve collection, and it was not very successful. And so here, in a sense, quality diversity is indeed exploring this search over collection, but more in a steady state manner where we are just locally modifying the collection step by step or element by element and progressively converging to something that is high performing and diverse.
All right, thank you. To take a break from the technical questions again, how did you start in this field, and what were your first impressions when you first started studying evolutionary algorithms?
Oh, yes, that's a good question. So the way I started was I did my studies in France, and so at the end of my engineer degree, I distinctly remember watching a video. Actually, it was a work from Pierre-Yves in the south of France, where the robots just discover how to learn through artificial curiosity. So you directly learn how to walk simply by aiming at generating new perception. And I found that very mind blowing. And I say, okay, that's the kind of thing I want to do. Because I was very enjoying actually my engineering degree, and I was very enjoying learning and discovering new things. And I did an entire degree on robotics, and I was like, no, okay, how can I, moving from myself learning stuff, how can I make robot learning stuff? And when I saw this video from Perry Vudeye's work, where they managed to just teach a robot to do something even without teaching it, that was kind of mind blowing. And so I was also very lucky to have one of my professors, Jean-Baptiste Mouret, who was also at the same time teaching me the basis of artificial intelligence for robotics. And we started discussing, and I did an internship, and I started to work on using evolutionary algorithm in order to teach robot to walk. And very quickly, I was actually already doing what I dreamed to do, which was teaching robot to do stuff. And we had this very interesting problem of recovering from damage. And at the end of my internship, we published a very good paper that was kind of the foundation of the Nature paper we published later about this damage recovery. And I also distinctively remember that I was happy of my robots working straightforward and recovering from damage, but I was also a little bit frustrated by, yeah, okay, I have a robot that work as fast as possible, straightforward, but well, as soon as it would face a wall, that would be the end of the game. I need my robot to be able to do way more than just going straight forward. So then I was thinking about how can I how can I teach my robot to do more than just one thing? And then we started to consider this notion of diversity. That's where I started to read the Novelty Search paper, and that was kind of a turning point in my ideas. And I said, okay, what we need is not just considering reward, but also diversity, also the capabilities of doing more things, up to a point where sometimes I'm even not even considering reward, because finding a reward when we consider diversity is sometimes quite difficult, in a sense that what is reward? Even when you consider working straightforward, working as fast as possible is not always necessary. And for instance, I'm always thinking about what is the reward of human when they walk, for instance, because as a human, I can walk as fast as I can. So that might be one way, but I can also walk slowly. I can also walk in a completely degenerated manner that is using a lot of energy. And so things like minimizing energy consumption, maximizing velocity, even maximizing stability, all of this is not necessarily always used, because as a human, I have the power to do and to change all of this at will. And so for me, that is raising a lot of interesting questions that are a little bit not considered when we consider only reward, but that can start to be considered a little bit when we pour diversity into the mix.
Okay, great. Thank you. We have time for just a few more questions before we end. So next one is, what is the relationship between quality diversity and the concept of an ecological niche in life science?
So there are some links, definitely, because you can imagine that a cell, for instance, like from the grid of Mappetit, to be a niche. And the idea here with quality diversity is that we want solution to only compete within the niche. We have even, in the deep grid paper we have submitted at A-Life last year, we had even within every cell actually a small population of solution, where the solution can compete between each other. We can maintain a small diversity, or a small diversity of performance, in order to ensure that we are not favoring always the same solution. So there's definitely a link between this type of representation. That's something I'm not exploring personally, but that's something very interesting.
Okay, cool. Yep, definitely lots of good literature out there if you're interested in this question. Okay, second to last question. Are there any costs associated with maintaining or storing a large set of possible solutions on board the robots?
Yes and no. So indeed, if you have very large and complex behaviors, like maybe the 20,000 parameter solution, that might take a little bit of space. But I remember actually measuring the the database of the 13,000 different solutions that I show you on the example robots. And it was actually a text file of, I think, if I remember correctly, something like 6 megabytes or 4 megabytes, something that is very, very, very small. We just need to store the parameters of the solution, the behavior descriptor and the fitness, so in a text file that is actually very small. And that's pretty much it. So there is not really a cost on this, and usually the cost is more on generating the collection. And right now, for instance, we have no ways of doing this directly on a physical robot because, for instance, most of the examples that I show you using simulated robots are actually using millions of evaluation in order to explore this diversity or space. So I will say that where we are putting a lot of effort, not just myself, but the rest of the community as well, is to try to make quality diversity a little bit more data efficient, so to be able to converge to the same level of diversity and high performance while minimizing the number of evaluation we have to do on the simulation and hopefully at some point directly on the physical robot.
All right, and our last question for today is a dreamy, large picture question. How do you think quality diversity optimization will impact the industry in the next decade?
So let's say my hope is that we can use quality diversity in a lot of applications. So for instance, as I said, for video games, so a lot of people are currently working on this, but this can be translated to a lot of different industries. So for instance, if you want to design drugs, we can also use this diversity in order to try to find how to maybe cure multiple diseases at the same time, or to use diversity in order to make personalized and highly tailored drugs designed for different type of people. So for instance, with different gender or with different age or with different characteristics, making something like that is more personalized automatically by leveraging this idea of different solution actually can lead to better stepping stones in order to find even better solution. We can also imagine things for product design. So if you are, for instance, a company doing some computer assisted design, you can more and more use optimization algorithm in order to propose, for instance, or to, for instance, connect together two components in a mechanical design. But maybe what you might want to do is to be able to offer alternatives to your client, and so then the client can choose in an interactive manner. So for instance, again, Julian Togelius proposed a lot of work in this concept of interactive quality diversity, where you can actually pick, or the user can pick some interesting features and continue to explore around those features in an interactive manner. So I think the industry can also adopt this notion that one solution is not sufficient sometimes, that having diversity of solution can either be good to adapt to different situations. You can imagine if you have, for instance, managing a wind farm, and you might want to adapt the production of your wind farm or the storage of the produced energy depending on the weather forecast or something like this. You might want to use actually different strategies depending on where you are on the planet or depending on the specific circumstances that are currently existing. So again, having multiple solutions, multiple plans, multiple projects, multiple offering at end automatically generated, and having some guarantees or some demonstrations that those different solutions are as good as possible, I think that's a new opportunity for industries that is barely considered at the moment.
Okay, cool. So that will go ahead and wrap up our Q&A session. So thank you very much for your talk. We really appreciated it. What we're going to do now is we are going to be moving over to Zoom, and the link for the Zoom chat is available in the YouTube chat right now for anybody who would like to join us. So we will see you in just a few moments.
Thank you very much again for the invitation.